commanded us to study His Word. In John 1:29 it says, "Look, the Lamb of Yahweh, who takes away the sin of the world." In 1 Corinthians 5:7 and 8, it says, "Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore let us keep the feast." The feast of what? The feast of Passover. Not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and envy, but with unleavened bread, the matzah of sincerity and truth. In Revelations 14:1 it says, "I looked and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion." Now Yeshua, talking about the Passover in a veiled way, because what I want you to see is the Passover is actually the rehearsal dinner for the marriage feast of the Lamb. We can see that here. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king, who made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding. And they would not come. Again he sent forth other servants, saying, "Tell them that they are bidden. Behold, I have prepared my dinner, my ox, my fatlings were killed, and all things are ready. Come unto the marriage." But they made light of it, and went their ways, one to his farm, the other to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servants, and treated them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard thereof, he was angry, and he sent forth his armies, and destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then said he to his servants, "The wedding is ready, but they that were bidden were not worthy. You go therefore into the highways, and as many as you shall find, bid to the marriage." So those servants went out into the highways and gathered all together as many as they found, both bad and good, because Yeshua found us in our trespasses and sins. And there he applied his blood and seated us. If we would choose the kingdom, he would seat us in heavenly places. So he went and got the bad and the good, and the wedding was furnished with the guests. And when the king came in to see his guest, he saw there a man who did not have on a wedding garment. And he said unto him, "Friend," saying that he had had a relationship with this man, "Friend, how did you get in here not having a wedding garment?" And he was speechless. Then said the king to the servants, "Bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now here it is, the moral of the whole story. "For many are called, but few are chosen." Matthew 22:2-14. How do we get chosen? "Israel, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation," says Exodus 19:5-6. Yahweh did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, but because you were the humblest. And Yahweh cannot turn away a broken and a contrite spirit, can he? You were the humblest of all people, says Deuteronomy 7:7. The Passover is exclusive. You have to have your wedding garment on. The wedding garment of fine linen, white like wool. But the ramifications of this, what does that mean? What truly does that mean to be accepted into the wedding feast? Well, it tells us in Scripture in Exodus 12:43-48. Yahweh said to Moses and Aharon, "These are the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat of it. Any slave that you have bought may eat after you have circumcised him. But a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat of it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate Yahweh's Passover must have all the males in his household, what? Circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat of it. Exodus 12, 43 through 48. So that wedding garment symbolized the circumcision both of the heart and the flesh. In Exodus 12, 43 through 48, a mixed multitude, Israelite and Gentile, received the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat of it. Any slave you have bought may eat after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident or a hired worker that's not circumcised may not eat of it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. Why? Because it's symbolic of Yeshua, and Yeshua's bones were not broken. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. If you're in the kingdom, you must celebrate it wherever you live. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate Yahweh's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat of it. So there's two types of people. The Israeli, he's already obedient and Torah observant. And then the Gentile, volunteering to be obedient to Yahweh, choosing Yahweh over the other gods of the mixed multitude. The second group, we're told in Exodus 12:48, are to be treated like one born in the land. Amen? We know that the disciples of Yeshua celebrated the Passover. And even 300 years later, the Diospini, the family of Yeshua, were still keeping the Passover. Listen to what 1 Corinthians 10, 18 and 22 says. Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? So on that night, on the Passover night, your table becomes an altar, the table of Yahweh. Do I mean that the food sacrificed to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. Idols are nothing. That's not the problem. When you go into an Oriental restaurant and you see a Buddha in the foyer with incense and apples and meat offered up to that idol, they have tithed off of that buffet that you're about to eat and contaminated it. Because listen to this. You see, when they're offering to those pagan idols, those idols are nothing but the sacrifices of pagans are really offered up to demons, not to Yahweh. And I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of Yahweh and the cup of demons too. I'll get a little closer to home. You can't eat Passover and go eat a ham on Sunday morning to Easter. We'll talk about that a little bit more. You cannot drink the cup of Yahweh and the cup of demons too. You cannot have part of both Yahweh's table and the table of demons. Are we trying to arouse Yahweh's jealousy? Are we stronger than He? I'll answer that rhetorical question. No. Heavens, no. The entire Scripture is a continuous revelation of Yahweh. In Genesis 17, when Yahweh is making a covenant with Abraham, Yahweh tells Abraham that the circumcision is a sign. It's a sign we're in covenant with Him. It is an everlasting sign. And here in Exodus 12, we're told to be at Yahweh's table. We must have that sign. Amen? He said, but now, Rabbi, in Acts 15 it says that the Gentiles that are coming in, we can't lay on them any more than they can bear. They're just to abstain from idols. They are to abstain from strangled meat and blood and so forth. It says they don't have to be circumcised. I'm not talking about salvation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm talking about who's going to sit at Yahweh's table. Not everybody can sit at the table. it should provoke the young convert to come a little closer and get at Yahweh's table. Not like a dog lapping at the floor, but come on in and sit at Yahweh's table. A person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No! A person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart first. You've got to be circumcised of the heart before you ever can be circumcised of the flesh and let it be counted as an act of righteousness. And circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person praise is not from other people, but from Yahweh, says Romans 2:28 and 29. Israel has known that because to them were committed the oracles of Yahweh. It's just by the time of Yeshua, their teachers were teaching another message. Yahweh, your Elohim, will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants so that you may love Him with all your heart and with all your soul and live, says Deuteronomy 30:6. When are you circumcised? 8 days after you're born. Circumcision of the heart is the fruit of the new birth. It's always been the new birth. That's why Yeshua was challenging Rav Nicodemus ben Gurium, that the world knows as Nicodemus, when he said, you should know this. The Torah teaches new birth. You can't have circumcision of the heart before you're born. You have to be born again first. What advantage then is there in being a Jew? Or what value is there in the circumcision? Much in every way. First of all, the Jews have been entrusted with the very words of Yahweh. What if some were unfaithful? Will their unfaithfulness nullify the faith of Yahweh? Not at all. Let Yahweh be true and every human being a liar, says Romans 3:1-3. Circumcision is an outward sign of what's going on inside. Amen? So put it into a nutshell. Circumcision of the heart is holiness. It implies being cleansed from sin. Let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of Yahweh, says 2 Corinthians 7:1. As a consequence, the believer has the virtues of Messiah and aims to fulfill the text which says, be ye perfect, as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5:48. What does that mean? Be ye holy, as I am holy, Yahweh says. Don't think that circumcision is going to avail you of anything if there's nothing inside. Listen to what he says. The days are coming, says Yahweh, when I'll punish all those who have been circumcised in their uncircumcision. What are you talking about? They've been circumcised in the flesh, but not in the heart. Egypt, Yehuda, Edom, the people of Ammon and Moab, all those living in the desert. See, all of those people circumcised their young. But it was only in the flesh. Israel should know better. Yehuda should know better. Edom, no. Egypt, no. Ammon, Moab, no. But Israel knows better. All those living in the desert who cut the edges of their beards. See, that's another sign that you're a heathen. That you shave off the corners of your beard and just have a goatee. We're sheep, not goats, aren't we? The goats are symbolic of the world. No, we have a full beard. For although all the Goyim are uncircumcised, all the house of Israel have uncircumcised hearts. Jeremiah 9:25. When do you start acting like a Gentile? When you have uncircumcised hearts. Remember the people that were going to Emmaus on the first day after they had been up at the temple for the Feast of First Fruits? Listen to what they said and how Yeshua talks about the Passover. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Yeshua himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" Now, what were they supposed to be discussing? The word says in Deuteronomy, you talk about the Torah when you're walking by the way, when you're sitting down and when you're reclining. They should have been talking about the Torah, but instead they were talking about Yeshua and all the events that had happened. They stood still, their faces downcast, one of them named Cleopas. Now, Cleopas is not a Hebrew name. So these were 2 Hellenists. What are Hellenists? Jews that look like Gentiles. They cut their hair short like Romans. They began to dress like Romans. They were being Greco-Romans. And he asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Yeshua HaNotzri." Now they've translated, most translations, Jesus of Nazareth. That's not what it says. It says Yeshua HaNotzri. Yeshua the branch. Netzer's the branch. Notzri means you're the branch. So, about Yeshua the branch. The branch of what? The branch of the royal family. The crown prince, in other words. They replied, "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before Yahweh and all the people." The chief priests and other rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. He was going to restore the divided kingdom and kick the Romans out of the occupation. And what is more, it's the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but it didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see Yeshua. He said to them, can you imagine? He walks up, he's talking to these guys, and then he insults them. How foolish you are. And how slow to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning him. When he got to Moses and he was explaining them about himself, wonder what he talked about. I'll tell you. The Passover. Because in all that Moses taught, it was the Passover that spoke loudly about Yeshua. As they approached the village to which they were going, Yeshua continued on as he was going further, but they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread. What kind of bread? Well, it's still this period of unleavened bread. So that bread that he broke, it says he gave thanks. No, he gave a bracha. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam. Ha-matzah lechem min haaretz. Amen. Blessed is he, Yahweh, King of the universe, who resurrects the unleavened bread from the earth. He began to give it to them. Then their eyes were suddenly opened, and they recognized him, and poof! He disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, "Oh, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" Luke 24:13-22. They didn't recognize him because they had a veil over their hearts. Therefore, since we have such a hope, we are very bold. We are not like Moses, who had put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away. But their minds were made dull, for to this day the same veil remains with the old covenant when the old covenant is read. It has not been removed, because only in Messiah is it taken away. Even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil covers their hearts. But whenever anyone turns to Yahweh, the veil is taken away. Now Yahweh is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of Yahweh is, there's freedom. And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate Yahweh's glory are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from Yahweh, who is Spirit. 2 Corinthians 3:12 through 18. Did you see the dynamic? Once they had understood, once they were seeking wisdom, suddenly wisdom was given to them, and the veil was lifted off of their hearts, and they recognized Yeshua. Not just semblance form, but who He was, King Messiah. Were not our hearts burning within us while we talked with us on the road and opened the Scriptures to us? Meant they had received circumcision of their heart to recognize King Messiah Yeshua. The story of Exodus is undeniably a powerful metaphor, a journey of personal and corporate transformation. A family of 70 people going to Egypt because of a famine, and they settle in Goshen. The land of Goshen is at first this very fertile, nurturing environment where the Israelite people can grow into a nation. But over time it changes, and what was once a nurturing womb for growth becomes this oppressive society where they were enslaved. We've got to come out of oppression. Commemorate this day, the day of Passover, that you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because Yahweh brought you out with a mighty hand, says Exodus 13:3. Egypt. In Hebrew, the word Egypt is actually Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim. It comes from the root matzor. And matzor is to oppress. Now, if you know anything about Hebrew, you know that I am there is a masculine plural. So, Mitzrayim is the plural of Matzor. So really, the land of Egypt is the land of oppressions. So what was Israel before they had gone into Egypt? Well, there was a famine in the land of Israel. So it forced them to get up and go where there was nourishment. The children of Israel settled in Goshen. Why in Goshen? Because we know that Scripture says the land of Goshen doesn't belong to Egypt. The land of Goshen is part of Sion, is part of Israel. It was given to Israel by Abraham. And so they were going to what was theirs. Even today, you remember how Israel fought a battle at Yom Kippur back in 1973, and they won the Sinai area. And what happened? They gave it back. Same with Goshen. They gave it back to Egypt when they left in the Exodus. But still, ladies and gentlemen, Goshen doesn't belong to Egypt. It belongs to Israel. The children of Israel were numbered 70 families back then. But then they became a vast nation by the time they left Egypt 430 years later. But while they were in Egypt, they began to change. They stopped circumcising their sons, and they quit keeping the Sabbath. Why? Because they had assimilated. The same reason that you weren't keeping Sabbath. And that by and large, we had forgotten to circumcise our young. And we had forgotten that we were Israel. We just kept going west, west, west. And our heart kept growing cold, cold, cold. Pharaoh was told about these people in his land. They're not like other people. They have strange customs and laws. And they're growing so large that we're not going to be able to contain them. If an enemy comes up, they might side with our enemy and destroy us. We got to get rid of them. And Pharaoh said, we've got to be shrewd about this. Shrewd. In Genesis it said that the snake was more shrewd than any other animal. So Pharaoh was going to take on the character of Hasatan. The word arum means subtle, shrewd, crafty, and sly. Satanic. It's from the word satin, meaning one who stands against. Stands against who? Stands against Israel. So the plan, oppress Israel to make them ineffectual. They didn't want to get rid of Israel. They needed the labor force. They needed their monies. They needed their properties. So they decided, we'll just oppress them. Yeah, that'll work. That'll endure them. So that when an enemy comes up, they wouldn't dare side with an enemy. But Pharaoh thought it was a good plan. No, worse than Pharaoh was something else. It wasn't Pharaoh that caused the people to backslide. It was the cult of Egypt. Egypt wasn't just a nation, it was a cult. And cults seduce through, and I'll look at this. Number one, deceptive theology. Number two, false revelations. I got a word. I got a word for you. Oh, he gets revelation. He's something. Tyranny. Pyramidal control from the top down. Secret teachings. Shh. Fear and intimidation. Separation and isolation. Have you ever noticed cults always isolate you from your families? Communal cells, home groups, centralized control, and enforced obedience. That's how the cult of Egypt was successful. Where did the cult of Egypt originate? Not in Egypt, but in the valley of Shinar, at a place called Babel, under a man named Nimrod. Do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed by them. Jeremiah 10:2. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless there's a falling away first. A falling away from what? The true faith. 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Now the Spirit expressly says that in the last days, some will depart from the faith. Because, ladies and gentlemen, a famine is coming upon the land. Another famine. But this time it's just not a famine of the earth, but it'll be in the earth too. But it's a famine of the Torah, of the Word. They'll depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, says 1 Timothy 4:12. There's only one true faith, the faith of Yahweh. There's one body and one spirit, just as you were called into one hope of your calling, one sovereign, one faith, one immersion, one Elohim and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. Ephesians 4:4-6. This faith originated with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Beloved, while I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common faith, I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to earnestly contend for the faith which was once and for all delivered to the saints. Jude 1:3. It's the faith of the Torah. Remove from me the way of lying and grant me your Torah graciously. I have chosen the way of truth. Your judgments I have laid before me, says Psalms 119:29 and 30. Your Torah is the truth, says Psalms 119:142. So Rabbi Shaul, that the world knows as Paul, is saying, in the last day, deceiving spirits will preach lies and hypocrisy and doctrines of demons. What is that lie? If Yahweh's Torah is the way of truth, then the lie being preached is to depart from the faith is that the law or the Torah has been done away with. Churchianity teaches that, don't they? These deceived ones are walking according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience or lawlessness. What do we call lawless people? Outlaws. And that's what these false preachers are. They're outlaws teaching an outlaw faith. It says Ephesians 2:2. Part of that faith is false Sabbaths, false holy days. Tonight I want to talk about the Feast of Ishtar. Now Ishtar has several names: Semiramis, Venus, Aphrodite, Artemis, Athena, Gaia, and so forth. When you look at Easter, and I'm going to quote The Two Babylons, page 103, by Reverend Alexander Hislop. Listen to this. Then look at Easter. What means the term Easter itself? Have you ever wondered that? I can remember at 8 years old, I asked my Sunday school teacher, what does Easter mean? Why do we call it Easter? And she said, well, because everything happened in the East. That's weird, isn't it? It bears the Chaldean origin on its very forehead. Easter is nothing else but Astarte, one of the titles of Beltis, the Queen of Heaven. The origin of the Easter egg is just as clear. The ancient Druids bore an egg as a sacred emblem of their order. In ancient times, eggs were used in religious rites of the Egyptians and the Greeks, who were hung up for the mystic purposes in their temples. From Egypt, these sacred eggs can be distinctly traced to the banks of the Euphrates. The classic poets are all full of the fables of the mystics of the Babylonians, and thus its tale is told by Hyginus the Egyptian, the learned keeper of the Palatine Library in Rome in the time of Augustus, who was skilled in the wisdom of his native country. An egg of wondrous size is said to have fallen from heaven into the river Euphrates. The fish rolled it up to the bank, where the doves, having settled upon it, hatched it. And out came Venus, who afterwards was called the Syrian goddess, that is Astarte. Hence the egg became one of the symbols of Astarte, or Easter. End of quote. So Astarte, or Easter, was worshipped as the Mother of God and the Queen of Heaven. Reverend Alexander Hislop, in his book again, The Two Babylons, this time on page 197 to 205, frankly calls the cross, the pagan symbol, the Tav, the sign of the cross, the indisputable sign of Tammuz, the false Messiah, the mystic Tav of the Chaldeans or the Babylonians and the Egyptians, the true original form of the letter T, the initial of the name of Tammuz. The Babylonian cross was the recognized emblem of Tammuz. With the birth of the Babylonian Antichrist came the traditional celebration of his birthday after the winter solstice on December the 25th. When Tammuz reached his 40th year, he was killed by a wild boar. His worshippers lamented over his death for 40 days of Lent, one day for each of his years. Before he was resurrected or reincarnated, this established a new ritual of worship by offering wafers to the Queen of Heaven. 40 days of abstinence or Lent to memorialize the weeping for Tammuz, followed by a feast to celebrate his resurrection. During these celebrations, the people would exchange Ishtar eggs, dipped in the blood of sacrificed newborns, to symbolize new life. The Easter sunrise service is derived from the ancient pagan practice of welcoming the sun on the morning of the spring equinox, marking the beginning of spring. What we now call Easter lilies were revered by the ancients as symbols of fertility and representative of the male genitalia. The ancient Babylonian religions had rituals involving dyed eggs, as did the ancient Egyptians. The myth of Horus was born on December the 25th of the Virgin Isis Miri. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, which in turn 3 kings followed to locate and adorn the God-man. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was murdered, his body scattered in pieces. When his mother and wife finds out, she gathers the scattered pieces and puts them in a box, buries them and laments. Out of the ground springs up an evergreen tree, and thus Horus is resurrected. Isis Miri gives birth to Osiris the sun in the spring, and she declares him to be Horus reincarnated, so the cycle begins all over again. And what is amazing to me was at the spring equinox, they kept a festival of Isis, like a Passover. And they told the story of the death of Horus or Tammuz, and how he resurrected or reincarnated through Osiris. And as they were telling the story, they would kill a wild boar, a pig, and they would eat that meal on that table as they were telling the story. It was a perversion of Passover, wasn't it? Isn't that amazing? Ham is eaten at Easter because Tammuz, the reincarnated sun deity Nimrod, was thought to have been killed by a boar. Alexander Hislop in the Two Babylons shows that the boar slain represented ancient Tammuz. After Nimrod's death, his wife Semiramis gave birth to a child, Tammuz, which she claimed to be Nimrod reincarnated. And you can see Semiramis is Isis. Nimrod is Horus. And Tammuz is Osiris. Tradition says that Nimrod was so evil that his grand uncle Shem ordered his execution. The great hunter and empire builder Nimrod in Genesis 10, 8 through 12 had been a mighty one, worshipped by his followers as the sun. Since the sun dies at the winter solstice, the boar's head was eaten on the eve or the beginning of December the 25th, signifying the death of the old sun. And the new sun, Tammuz, returns. And then in the spring, we start the cycle all over again. So we eat ham again, saying that we're victorious over the boar that killed Tammuz. What an abomination. That here, when we're supposed to be celebrating Passover, the church is celebrating something else. And they're eating a ham on their tables while they're still talking about the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus. Kind of sounds like ISIS, doesn't it? We're living again in oppression. We see everything around us. We go into the department store, and there's that subtle oppression of those yummy chocolate eggs and those cute little bunny rabbits. They promise them freedom while they themselves are slaves of depravity. For a man is a slave to whatever mastered him. They are worse off at the end than they were at the beginning. So 2 Peter 2, 19 through 20. We were worse off going down to Egypt than we would have been if we'd have stayed in the famine. At least we'd have died in our faith and not assimilated into this oppression. Egypt was warm, friendly, accepting, decadent, opulent, sophisticated, with a well-defined belief system. It just was a lie. There was a prophecy of this going to happen. Abraham received it 430 years before. Yahweh said to Abram, "Know for certain that your descendants will be aliens in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish that nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions," says Genesis 15, 13, and 14. To help Israel leave Egypt. They wouldn't do it on their own. They needed someone to help them. They needed an agent of deliverance. And that man was Moses. In Hebrew, his name is Moshe, which means drawn, like water is drawn. It comes from the root word misha, meaning to draw a liquid. It is also the root word for another word, Moshiach, which means to anoint or consecrate by what is drawn. In this case, oil. Or that's Meshachach. But that's the root of Mashiach. So you have Moshi, Misha, Meshacha, and Moshiach means anointed. So Moses can be traced back, or Mashiach can be traced back to the name Moses. But isn't that what Mashiach would be? A second Moses? Yes. Moses received this commission. Yahweh said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in the land of oppressions, Mitzrayim, Egypt. I have heard them crying out. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, says Exodus 3, 7, 9, and 10. To get Pharaoh to let go of Egypt, Yahweh sent 10 plagues. Each plague attacked one of the gods of Egypt. But the greatest one was the one you can see, the one you can talk to, the one you can hear, Pharaoh. Pharaoh was a God-man. He was selected from the firstborn. So when Pharaoh's firstborn died, when it finally got to his house, he said, let them go. Why? Because he had compassion on his boy? No. Because the plague was spherical. And it took the first generation out first. And it was heading for him. He was the firstborn. So he was just trying to survive when he said, let him go. It wasn't because he was repentant. He was still just as wicked as he ever was. He still had a hard heart, a heart of stone. No, it was because he was just trying to have the survival of the fittest. Yahweh had to get Egypt out of Israel. The first thing he did is he took yeast away from them, chametz. And leaven, yeast, is symbolic of sin, isn't it? So they made matzot, unleavened bread, symbolic of holiness, from the root word matzatz, to drain out. Drain what out? Drain the assimilation out of you. Drain the influence of paganism out of you. The first place they went, once they crossed out of Egypt, the first place they went was a place called Sukkot. Sukkot means temporary dwellings. The whole city was a city of tents. And Israel had forgotten how to live in tents. Why? Because they'd lived in the limestone houses of Egypt for 430 years. They forgot their heritage. So they had to go to Sukkot and buy tents and learn how to live in them, how to pitch them. And I can tell you from practice, you need to learn. Because I didn't know how to pitch a tent. I'm still not real good at it. But my wife is very good. Now, that's why we have Sukkot. That's why we have the holy day Sukkot. He says, because I want you to remember that your descendants lived in tents. After they left Sukkot, they came to the Red Sea, the Yom Soph, symbolic of immersion. After they crossed in the Exodus, they came to this place called Marah, which meant bitter. They had to depend on Yahweh for sweetness. Then they came to Sinai. We know as Sinai. It's the land of sin, it means. Sin is the moon god. He's also called Allah. Allah is not his name. It's his title. It means most high. It was the ancient god of the Arabians. And still the Arabs today worship Allah. There the matzah was replaced by manna. And manna is heavenly food. Amen? Then they came to the city Rephidim, which means support, for them to say, I understand that blessed is He, Yahweh, who keeps me alive through giving me sustenance. He supports me. While they were leaving Rephidim, they were attacked by the Amalekites. The Amaleki means people of lapping, like a dog. In Exodus 17:16, it says, Yad al Chesyah, the hand is on the throne of Yah. Now that's interesting. The Amalekites are saying that the hand is on the throne of Yah. Why is that interesting? Because they only used half of Yahweh's name. The Yod and the Hey. That's one half of Yahweh's name. The Amalekites wanted to stop the name of Yahweh from being fully implemented in this world. Like we see now. They're trying to stop the implementation of the true Elohim, Yahweh. And they've replaced Him with God, haven't they? We know God is not His name. God is the name of the Babylonian god of luck. Blessed is the man that does these things. What things? Loves my name, says Isaiah 56. Therefore my people shall know my name, Isaiah 52:6 says. And truly, indeed, this is the reason I have raised you up. This is the reason why you're alive, ladies and gentlemen. To show my power in you, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Exodus 9:16. What's His name? Yahweh. So it's clear that Israel had to get out of Egypt, had to get out of there, and eventually Moses leads them to freedom. We can see that as a symbol of how we often develop life structures, relationships, and even careers where we thrive for some period of time and there is room for a lot of growth. But just like the fetus in the mother's womb can grow and be nourished, but then eventually it gets to be a tight place, a place of oppression. The Hebrew word for Egypt, in fact, is Mitzrayim, which literally means a tight place, a place of constriction or oppression. We're still being delivered. Yahweh says, if you forsake my Torah, I will scatter you throughout the world. Yahweh will scatter you among all the nations from one end of the earth to another, says Deuteronomy 28:64, and that's happened, hasn't it? Yes. So we're still in a state of deliverance. We haven't gotten to the promised land yet. Rabbi Hanach of Alexander, who was a Hasidic master, said it was easier to take Israel out of Egypt than to take Egypt out of Israel. Similarly, it's often true that people move on and leave bad situations, but then they go and recreate them someplace else. Because the deeper dynamic that got them there in the first place hasn't really shifted. You carry it with you like a bad wart. People change their outer circumstances with compound W, but their inner landscape remains unchanged. They keep picking the same kind of guy or girl. They keep going to the same kind of job. They keep picking the same kind of friends, and they wonder, whoo! Why does this always happen to me? Because you're an idiot. You got a deeper work on the inside of you. Get rid of the images. The deep-seated images, the same things that you keep visioning that you think is good and perfect and worth living for. We got to change ourselves inside to out. That's the goal of the new birth. And that's the secret meaning of Passover. It's the struggle of relationship. Israel comes from the name Ish Zar El. Ish, man, Sar, ruler, El, the mighty one. In other words, Yahweh rules these men. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son, says Hosea 11:1. So ancient Israel is our example. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact all were under the cloud, passed through the sea, immersed into Moses, the cloud and the sea, ate the same spiritual food, drank from the spiritual rock. That rock was Messiah. Elohim was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did, says 1 Corinthians 10:1-6. Only 2 men out of the whole Exodus, out of the original adult party, only 2 men, Joshua and Caleb. And Caleb was a Gentile. His name is not really a name, it's a title. It means the dog. So 1 Israelite and 1 Gentile of the original party is all that made it in. Listen to what David Ariel says in his book, The Mystic Quest. If the days of awe in Sukkot are part of the process of unification, Pesach, or Passover, is a ritualistic drama of vanquishing of evil and demonic forces. Jewish mystics invested the holiday with special significance. For them, it symbolized a victory over the demonic forces that prevailed in the world as a result of the separation of Malchut, or the kingdom, and Tiferet, the foundation. Now the kingdom is the kingdom of Yahweh. The foundation is the Torah. The many rituals of Pesach are linked to the symbolism of redemption from evil. The Paschal lamb was slaughtered in ancient times and eaten on the holiday. A vestige of this practice, which was abandoned after the destruction of the Second Temple, can be found in the roasted shank bone that is placed on a special plate at the Seder table. Jewish mystics describe this as a religious ritual that destroys the powers of evil. The slaughter of the lamb is the first ritual performed on the holiday and indicates that the husks must be destroyed in order for the Sephiroth, or the graces of Yahweh, to escape from their dominion. The Seder is a religious ritual designed to reunite the Shekinah, the presence of Yahweh, with Tiferet, the foundation of our faith. Says David Ariel in The Mystic Quest, an introduction to Jewish mysticism. Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues, says Revelations 8:18-4. It's talking about getting out of the Egypt, Babylon, Rome connection of faith. Come out from among them and be separate, says Adonai. Do not touch what is unclean, and I'll receive you, says 2 Corinthians 6:17. And then we'll have a united Israel, a holy nation. Beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of Yahweh. 2 Corinthians 7:1. All the days of the afflicted are miserable, but he that is of a merry heart has a continual feast. What feast? Passover. Better is a little with the fear of Yahweh than great treasure with trouble. Better is a dinner of herbs, the Seder, where love is, than a fatted calf with hatred, says Proverbs 15:15-17. Remember, Messiah, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast. 1 Corinthians 5:7-8. That's my message. Amen. Are there any questions about what I talked about tonight? I know I gave you a lot of information really fast. Are there any questions? Yes, Roy.
Where's Goshen?
Goshen, if you look at the land of Israel, it's like a square box on the right corner of Africa. And when you look at the Nile comes up and then fans out. It's called the Nile Delta. And there's several little tributary rivers that go flowing into the ocean. That area of the Nile Delta